The student went for an interview and disappeared without a trace. The next morning, her body was found in a field, and the police began searching for the culprit. From the first days in this case, there were many confusing moments and unexpected turns, but ultimately we managed to find out the truth. In this video, we will tell you what happened to Megan Sharpton. Megan Sharpton was born on October 24, 1987 in the small American town of Tullahoma, Tennessee. She grew up in a large and friendly family. She had two sisters and a brother, with whom the girl got along well. Her parents tried to pay maximum attention to all of their children, but Megan was closest to her mother. From an early age, the girl helped her parents take care of her younger brothers and sisters, and she also always strived to help friends and relatives. Already during her school years, Megan decided that she wanted to become a nurse, so she entered the local Motlove College, located 10 kilometers from her home. The girl also got a job as a waitress at a local restaurant, and after a while she moved in with her boyfriend Chris. In the summer of 2019, when Megan was 24 years old, she was just months away from graduating from college, after which she planned to immediately find a job as a nurse. Shortly before this, she also took a job in a nursing home to gain practical skills and help the elderly. Despite such an intense pace of life, Megan tried to see her family whenever possible. On June 1, her sister, who lived in another city, came home, and Megan promised to meet her. However, that evening the girl called her mother and said that she would be late. She was offered an interesting vacancy, and Megan arranged an interview that same evening. She was glad for this opportunity and promised her mother to come as soon as she finished the interview. According to her, the job was caring for an elderly woman. However, time passed, and there was no news from Megan. She did not answer messages and calls. Her parents began to worry. They contacted her boyfriend, but he also did not know where Megan was, and was not even aware of her interview. Despite this, the parents decided not to panic and wait for their daughter to get in touch. She was already 24 years old, and with her busy schedule between school and two jobs, the girl could easily be busy. But the next day Megan did not show up. Meanwhile, in a remote area several kilometers from the city, at about 2:30 in the morning, a group of teenagers noticed a fire in a field. It was a hot summer, so they thought the forest fires had spread to the grass. They immediately called the firefighters, and they arrived at the scene. An unexpected turn of events awaited them there. Soon after they began to extinguish the flames, firefighters saw a body lying at the center of the fire. When the fire was completely extinguished and the police arrived at the scene, they realized that a dead girl was lying in front of them. It immediately became clear to them that a murder had been committed, but detectives could not establish the identity of the deceased. She had no documents, wallet or phone on her, and was unable to be identified due to exposure to the fire. The only thing the detectives could cling to were two small tattoos in the shape of stars. Detectives examined the crime scene and concluded that the girl was dead before the fire started. This was evidenced by a serious head injury, which appears to have been fatal, but they were unable to find any traces of the killer's presence. The victim was partially missing clothes, but based on her t-shirt, the police concluded that the girl worked as a nurse. They also determined that they had not received any missing person reports related to this girl, which also made it difficult to establish her identity. However, soon the information spread throughout the small town. Her mother saw a post on a social network that a girl with two star-shaped tattoos had been found in a field at night, and realized with horror that the dead person was her daughter. A medical examiner was eventually able to confirm that she was indeed Megan Sharpton. They also determined that the cause of death was a bullet wound in the back of the head. This confirmed the police version that the girl was already dead when the fire started. Moreover, she was killed in another place, after which she was taken to that field. In addition, before her death she was subjected to violence, and experts were able to extract a DNA sample from the criminal. He was immediately run through the common base, but there were no matches. Detectives first began searching for Megan's car, a red Mustang. That evening she worked in a restaurant, from where she left in her car. However, he was nowhere to be found. This indicated that the killer had most likely driven him away somewhere, and strong evidence could be found there. But while his location remained unknown, the police began looking for potential suspects among Megan's acquaintances. The first thing their eyes fell on was her boyfriend, Chris. Moreover, the detectives had a good reason to take a closer look at him. Megan's sister almost immediately told them that she admitted Chris's involvement in the murder, since there were problems in the couple's relationship. Megan dated Chris for 3 years, part of which they lived together. The couple rented an apartment. They also had another neighbor with whom they shared rent. The police spoke with the guy, and he denied any involvement in the incident. At first, Chris said that everything was fine with Megan, but ultimately he confessed. The relationship had not been going well lately, and everything was heading towards separation. At the same time, he insisted that he did not have the slightest motive for this murder. Yes, and at the time of her death he had an unconditional alibi. While the police were checking his alibi, they also decided to examine the apartment where Megan and Chris lived. The first alarming clue awaited them in the bathroom. There they found traces of blood and needles, which were found to contain prohibited substances. At the same time, detectives found her car 20 kilometers from the city. He was abandoned in a deserted, remote area. There were no documents or Megan's phone inside, which meant that the criminal could have taken them or thrown them away somewhere else. The police immediately reached out to the public, asking people to contact them immediately if they find anything similar. In addition, there were no signs of blood or struggle in the car. But there was something interesting there, a note with an address that did not exist. Detectives came to the conclusion that using this address, an unknown criminal wanted to lure Megan to a deserted place to commit his crime. Detectives learned from the first hours of the investigation that the girl was going to go for an interview that evening. However, they had absolutely no clues in this direction. In their opinion, the non-existent address was given to the girl by the person who offered her the job. When the public learned the details of this case, many people drew an eerie parallel. 6 months ago, several hundred kilometers from Tullahoma, another girl, about the same age as Megan, disappeared without a trace. The creepiest thing is that she was also studying to be a nurse, and this coincidence led everyone to believe that there was a serial killer operating in the area. This only escalated the atmosphere and made residents fear that the criminal would strike again. Meanwhile, the police questioned the couple's neighbor, and he admitted that he had taken a prohibited substance. The guy said that Megan and Chris did not know about this and never resorted to using them themselves. Experts examined the traces of blood and came to the conclusion that they indeed belonged to the neighbor. But his story didn't end there. He said that Megan and Chris' relationship actually ended a long time ago, and recently he himself began dating her. At the same time, the guy assured that he was hiding his addiction from her. Knowing all this, the police began to suspect both Chris and the neighbor. The first could have harbored a grudge against the girl. The second had an addiction to illegal substances, but there was no evidence against them. During interrogation, Chris stated that he did not know about their relationship, and by that time the police had already checked his alibi. The guy was actually at work at the time of Megan's murder, so he was excluded from the list of suspects. As for the neighbor, he did not have such an ironclad alibi, but an analysis of his phone showed that he had been trying to call Megan all night and texted her in an attempt to find out where she had disappeared. This was not significant evidence of his innocence. The police doubted that he was the killer. DNA samples were taken from both guys and sent to the laboratory. However, the wait for results could drag on for months. At the same time, detectives have a new lead. During the last interrogation, Chris stated that he could help the investigation. On the day Megan disappeared, a man called her old phone, which was lying at home. He said that he wanted to talk to her about working as a nurse, and that the girl was recommended to him by a certain nom. Chris added that Megan several times mentioned a certain girl with the same name who went to college with her, but did not know any details. Then the police began to look for her among Motlov's students, and soon they succeeded. There was only one student at the college with that name, and detectives obtained her address, but the girl was not home. They then talked to her neighbors, and one of them gave them Nama's phone number. The girl was surprised by the call from the police and stated that she barely knew Megan. They overlapped on several subjects, but communicated quite rarely, and Nam did not recommend her to anyone for work. Moreover, the girl added that Megan annoyed her, so she definitely wouldn't help her. The cops were upset that this promising lead led nowhere, but they still had something more significant left. Chris handed them the same phone number that had received the call about work, and the detectives had the caller's number in their hands. Experts determined that the call was made from a prepaid phone, so it was impossible to establish the name of its owner. But the police tracked the device to the store where it was sold, and there was a surveillance camera in front of the cash register. Having studied the record on the day the phone was purchased, they immediately sought a buyer. From these frames, the police immediately realized that he was buying this phone for some illegal purposes. Prepaid phones in America are popular among those involved in criminal matters because they do not require you to provide your personal information to use them. And this man in the recording at some point took his own phone out of his pocket. This indicated that he was buying an extra one for some dubious purpose. The store also had a camera pointed at the parking lot. The police saw the buyer leave the building and get into his car, thanks to which his identity was soon established, and it turned out to be Timothy Jefford, who had an impressive criminal history behind him. True, the man was only involved in small-scale trafficking in prohibited substances, and was not seen in anything serious. Soon he was tracked down and taken to the station. He stated that he did not buy this phone for himself, but for his friend, a 37-year-old man named Donnie Frank. He said that he was going to have an operation, and he would not be able to go get the phone himself. As payment for this service, Donnie gave Timothy several illegal pills. The detective knew this man well. He also had an impressive criminal history, but often acted as a police informant. Despite this, no connection was made between Donnie and Megan until Timothy said something else. Donnie wrote to him that he wanted to trade his pickup truck for a Mustang and asked him to help with it. Timothy found this request rather strange. Donnie had 2 small children, and the Mustang was far from the most comfortable family car. However, he agreed to try to find a client. Donnie handed him the pickup truck, and he noticed that the interior of the rather old car had completely new floor mats and seat covers. Donnie explained it this way. His wife said the chances of selling a car with an updated interior are much higher. Here the police suddenly discovered something that shocked them, and glued all these parts of the story into one. Donnie Frank turned out to be the husband of the same Nauma who allegedly recommended the job for Megan. At that moment, the detectives realized that they were close to the solution. Unfortunately, the man's DNA sample was not in the database because he had not been convicted of violent crimes. They immediately headed to Donnie and Nauma's house to talk to them. The man initially said that he did not know Megan, but after a few minutes he said that he had given her and Nauma several rides to college. This seemed strange compared to Nauma's own testimony a few weeks earlier. Then she insisted that she barely knew Megan. They practically did not communicate and generally did not get along. However, during a follow-up conversation, the woman did say that her husband actually gave them a lift one day. However, Donnie firmly insisted on his innocence. According to him, on the evening of the murder he was at home with his children. He allowed police to search his home without a warrant and voluntarily provided his DNA sample. In addition, he denied that he asked Timothy to buy a prepaid phone for him. The police did not find a single clue in the house, and they could only wait for the results of the DNA examination, which could also take months. By that time, 2 months had already passed since the murder. Megan's parents received her nursing degree for her, and the entire event was dedicated to her memory. People hoped that the police would quickly catch the ruthless monster who could kill someone else at any moment. Ultimately, the results came back from the laboratory, and they showed a complete match of Donnie's DNA with a sample found on Megan's body. He was immediately taken to the police station, but he continued to insist on his innocence. After learning that the DNA samples matched, he changed his line and told detectives that he and Megan had an affair, which he kept secret from his wife. It was for this reason that the man allegedly did not talk about it initially. The police considered his story an obvious fabrication, but they had to let the man go. Apart from DNA, they had no connecting evidence, and it was simply impossible to find a 100% refutation of Donnie's words. Thus, the detectives were almost sure that the man was the killer, but they needed more evidence. Even though they could not charge him with murder, they managed to arrest him. And during a search of his car, they found a firearm, which he was not allowed to own due to his criminal record. While he was in custody, the police had time to search for additional evidence. They didn't have to worry about Donnie attacking anyone else or running away. Experts soon determined that Megan was shot from a weapon of the same caliber as Donnie's rifle. Detectives obtained a warrant to track his phone to see his movements on the evening of Megan's murder. They matched this data with the movements of a prepaid phone that Donnie allegedly never owned. And here the police received the long-awaited breakthrough. On the evening of the 1st of July, a prepaid phone was located next to Donnie's phone and was moving along the same route. Detectives have identified several key locations: the alleged location of Megan's abduction, the site of her murder, and the field where her body was found. At all these points, both phones were nearby. Donnie's family had several farms in the Tullahoma area. According to investigators, after the abduction, he brought Megan to one of them, subjected her to violence, and killed her. Detectives obtained a search warrant and found a strong lead there. There was a partially burned scarf that turned out to belong to Megan. This item was given to her by her sister. This evidence and the DNA match were already enough to send the case to court. On November 5, he was charged with murder. At the trial, new details emerged that only strengthened the case against Donnie. After studying his phone, experts discovered a lot of interesting things. It turned out that he repeatedly contacted other girls, offering them jobs to care for an elderly man. But all these attempts were unsuccessful. According to investigators, Donnie found Megan's phone number in his wife's contact list, contacted her, and said that Num had recommended her for a job as a caregiver. She agreed, and the man gave her a non-existent address, luring her to a deserted place. There he attacked her and took her to a farm, where he raped and killed her. Then he took her to the field and started a fire. The final touch was to completely replace the floor mats and covers in the pickup truck on which he weighed her body. Apparently, the man was afraid that some traces of blood could not be washed off, and the police would be able to detect them. As for Nami herself, the police came to the conclusion that she had nothing to do with the murder and did not know about it. That night she was at work, which was confirmed by numerous evidence. At the trial, Donnie protested his innocence, and everyone began preparing for a potentially lengthy trial. However, when the man realized that the prosecution would seek the death penalty, he nevertheless decided to make a deal with the investigation to renounce this sentence in exchange for a confession. As a result, he pleaded guilty to Megan's murder and was sentenced to life without parole. True, after some time he stated that he entered into this deal under pressure and demanded that the matter be reconsidered. And when the judge granted his request, the man quickly returned to his previous decision to plead guilty, because during the review, the death penalty was returned to the table. During the court hearings, it was also explained why the criminal, without a shadow of a doubt, voluntarily provided detectives with his DNA sample. Apparently, he hoped that the fire would destroy all traces, and the police would simply have nothing to compare his sample with. But he was wrong. With all this, investigators concluded that the DNA was highly likely not related to the disappearance of another student who disappeared 6 months before Megan. In that case, more suitable suspects became available, and DNA was no longer considered. After the verdict was announced, Megan's sister said the criminal would have continued to prey on young girls and could have taken many more lives. But Megan stopped him with her victim. And finally, what makes this story even sadder? In November 2013, Megan's mother, who made every effort to help the police catch her daughter's killer, took her own life. She could not cope with the devastating trauma that one cold-blooded criminal inflicted on her. Looking at Donnie's biography, it becomes clear that he could have been stopped much earlier. Among his many convictions were charges of kidnapping a young woman, but that time he managed to escape punishment, and the criminal remained free. Who knows, maybe Megan was not his first victim, but the police still don't know about it.